Okay, welcome and thank you for joining the Global Arctic Youth Network for this seminar. The Arctic Youth Network is open to all who are interested in shaping the future of the Arctic. This current seminar is part of a series of presentations that are geared towards discussing key issues facing the Arctic and communities around the world. As we prepare for the upcoming Arctic Youth Summit, which will be held this October 2018 in Rovaniemi, Finland. Today we have with us a few persons: Guðmundur Ögmundsson, Unit Manager of the Vatnajökulsþjóðgarður National Park in Iceland. We have Pétur Halldórsson, Chair of the Youth Environmentalist Association of Iceland, and Hillary Krieger, who is the moderator of the webinar series. I'm going to turn it over to you, Pétur.
Oh, thank you. So I'd just like to begin with explaining the Arctic Youth Network and how this Global Arctic Youth Network came to be. Last January, a group from Iceland visited Alaska and met a group called the Arctic Youth Ambassadors. And we decided that it was a problem that youth around the Arctic wasn't able to collaborate. So that's basically the whole purpose of this network, is for youth around the Arctic and the entire globe to be able to discuss Arctic issues, collaborate, and really effectively do joint projects and also speak as a whole on environmental and social issues regarding the Arctic. And
okay.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, Hillary, could you tell us a little bit about the webinar series?
I can indeed. So we have 8 webinars that are going to be happening every Sunday at this time between now and the summit that is going to be held in the first week of October in Rovaniemi, Finland. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I work for the conservation of Arctic flora and fauna in the Fish and Wildlife Service. I've only been in Alaska for 2 years, but during that time I've seen many people who live and thrive in the Arctic. However, they've also told me that many times they're having issues with changes in the Arctic, whether it be due to climate change or due to the large number of people who come and visit for tourism or something along those lines. And those people have also told me that a small change, that if everybody were to do it, would make a big impact on their lives. So that would be why I'm here. And I'm definitely overjoyed to be the moderator to this seminar series. And
okay.
Go for it.
Yeah, that's great. Guðmundur, could you maybe also introduce yourself?
Yes, sure I can. Yeah, like you said, my name is Guðmundur Ögmundsson, and I manage a unit within Vatnajökull National Park called Jökulsárgljúfur, literally meaning glacial river canyon. And in total, there are 5 units within Vatnajökull National Park, each with different manager. So I've been in this position here for almost 3 years now, but prior to that, I was an assistant to the unit manager in Skaftafell, which is also a part of the same national park. Now,
I'm thinking he might have lost a connection. Maybe we should move on to the next person.
Yeah, Guðmundur, can you hear us? Okay, Pétur, could you maybe tell us a little bit about the general concepts regarding national parks? I mean, people have questions. What the
wilderness aspect that got to me, like being in a remote but still a busy place where I was like positioned, and then having to go to even more remote places to find the relaxation and solitude, and sort of like opened up my mind to the importance of wilderness and made me determined to make sure it was there for the future generations. And of course, with Iceland's geographical position, it's a part of the Arctic, and it also is part of the region why there is this large wilderness area here. That's about it.
Okay, Guðmundur, I think we lost you for a few seconds. Could you do us a favor and explain the general concepts behind the purpose of national park in Iceland, and especially, of course, Vatnajökulsþjóðgarður Park, because you've been working there?
Yeah, the purpose is, of course, to protect landscape and natural features, wildlife, etc. But it's also the purpose is to make this natural areas accessible for people, to educate people about these areas, giving them the chance to enjoy them. And yeah, that's more or less it. There has been some focus on also the park being a tool in helping in terms of regional development, help sustain rural areas, giving opportunities to locals, etc. So sort of like towards the sustainability issue.
Right. People have also been wondering about how this affects human activity. I mean, when a national park is established, some people think that nobody can enter the zone, etc. But of course, there is freedom within the national park. Can you tell us a little bit about the pros and cons that come with a national park? I mean, some large-scale development might be cancelled, but we have some advantages instead. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about this? I mean, people could not make a hydropower dam within a national park, or could they?
No, not really. And maybe the unit where I am right now located is a good example of a place where there were ideas about like utilizing a huge waterfall to create a big dam, but thankfully, in my opinion, that did not come to fruition. There were big ideas about this in the 1930s and as late as the 1970s, but for one reason or another, people decided against this, and today this is a place which attracts almost 500,000 people every year, which generates a lot of business in the neighborhood area. And so, yeah, how do you say? Yeah, it's of course always this monetary side of things which comes in, but still, yeah.
Right. We need economic development when we talk about sustainable development. I guess that's what you're trying to say with tourism. I mean, we get a lot of tourism to the national parks.
Absolutely.
I'm also wondering, this Vatnajökulsþjóðgarður Park is based off of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. Isn't that right? You have like different, yeah. Can you tell us about that concept and what you think about that?
Yeah, well, most of the Vatnajökull National Park is within Category 2 of the IUCN criteria, which is a national park, meaning that the focus is on conserving nature, but at the same time making it accessible to people. And that's the majority of the park is within that criteria. Then again, we have a few areas which are belong to criteria 6, which is an area that that allows for what is called sustainable use. So hunting and grazing is allowed within those areas. Then we have a couple of areas that should probably fall under criteria 1A, which means that they are close to development and close to general traffic of people. These are the nunataks in glaciers, which are automatically protected. Every new piece of land that, if you know what a nunatak is, it's sort of like an area totally enclaved by a glacier. So and when a new one is exposed because of the thinning of the glacier, that is automatically protected. People are not allowed to go there, and that is for its research value. And that could be classified as an area within the 1A category, which is a wilderness category, but strictly enclosed to scientists. Officially, I don't think they have that classifications, these areas, but still, these are the rules regarding these areas as stated in the National Parks Management Plan.
Right. Well, how do you think that those rules will be extrapolated onto the Central Highland National Park? And what do you see? Do you think there is going to be a lot of difference between Vatnajökulsþjóðgarður National Park and the Central Highland National Park?
I think so. At least I hope so. I think there is because we mentioned earlier the economical factor of the national parks, and it also has to do with accessibility. My hope is for this new Central Highlands National Park is that it will in some places be categorized as a national park, that is category 2. But I'm also hoping for large areas to be within classification 1B, which is more protection than in national parks. It does mean that there is access for people, but it puts a lot more limits on infrastructures and businesses. And I think it's very important because this is a classification for wilderness areas, and there are, well, the Central Highlands National Park will be more or less a wilderness area, and we just have to take very good care to make sure that it will stay a wilderness.
Right.
But,
why?
Yeah.
Why is that? No, I'm sorry. The wilderness thing. I mean, we hear a lot about the uniqueness of Iceland, and that Iceland contains a lot of unique wilderness. How do you see this? Does Iceland have something that maybe areas around Europe do not have, or America on similar areas around the Arctic? Do you think there's a lot of unique things in Iceland that need to be protected?
Absolutely, and like in terms of just nature and the natural features, Iceland in whole is unique, and the Highland is very unique, just because of so many factors. We have this northerly geographical position. We have the warm sea currents around this island. It's a fact Iceland is an island which plays its part. Then in the Highlands we have this altitude, we have the glaciers and glaciation. And then we have this big factor which is volcanic activity. So this, when it all comes together, creates a place which is totally unique. You do not find anything like this in the world. Absolutely. You do find wilderness in other places. For instance, America has large parts of wilderness areas, both the US and Canada. Probably also Australia and more countries. But in Europe, because Europe was more or less settled, all of it in the early 1800s, everything has the hands of man or the work of man had put its stamp on most natural areas. So there were not really many untouched areas left in Europe, and so Europe is Iceland. The Icelandic Highlands is one of the last big wilderness areas left in Iceland, apart from Svalbard, I think, perhaps some areas in Russia. But then again, we can come to the question why wilderness is important. It is, of course, entirely like a human concept to experience wilderness, but I think wilderness is becoming ever more important to us with all the increased technology, we get all this outside, now I'm missing the word here, we are always being poked by advertisements and etc., social media and whatever, and with our lives becoming more technical, digital, whatever, it becomes more important for us, I think, to have this wilderness to retreat to sort of ourselves and more in touch with nature. And I believe that there are a lot of studies who confirm that it has this positive effect on people.
Right. We have a lot of advertisements trying to trying to make us think that we need to use nature more than conserve it. But you talk about these dangers. So the main dangers of the Icelandic Highlands, do you think it's development for energy companies, etc.? And could you tell us a little bit about, I mean, you have been in this national park discussion for a long time. So what are the major challenges in founding the Central Highland National Park? I mean, this has been taking quite some time now to found the national park. Does it really have political support? Does it have support of the people of Iceland? How do you see these issues?
Yeah, I think we are seeing more and more support for national park in the Highlands, both from the left and the right. And I think young generations play a hugely important part in this. We have to remember that these elderly generation, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe 40s to include myself, but yeah, I think especially those in their 50s, 60s and 70s, you have to think about their how do you say, their outlook when they were young people, and Iceland was more poorer country, which it is today. People did put a lot of hope into utilizing all these rivers, all this hydrological power which is in the rivers and the waterfalls. So I think the mindset of these elderly generations has been a bit towards that these rivers must be utilized. This hydropower must be utilized. But I think it's changing. Just we are better off economically as a nation now than we were before, and just people are thinking differently today than before, and therefore I think that the younger generations today, they have a different stance towards this idea. They do not find it as important, see it as an end goal in itself to not let these rivers go to sea without being utilized by hydro power plants. Yeah.
Right. We have in the Icelandic community a lot of people, like you say, who are surprised to think about these rivers not being utilized. We have seen large political parties talk about seeing these rivers running to the ocean as waste because we aren't utilizing them. And then we have people on our side who are saying, well, maybe a wilderness has a lot to offer in itself and untouched and undeveloped. I totally agree. But then again, we always ask the question, we here in Iceland, we say, well, we don't want to utilize these rivers, but then again, they are, in essence, they are, sorry for the term, but green energy. This is way less polluting energy than from fossil fuel power plants. I'm not taking this stance, but I'm just throwing this question to you. Do you think we need to make a stop to this this development in Iceland, where we're always building new power plants? Do we need to reconsider what needs are? I mean, we are already producing the most energy per capita in the world, but somehow most people seem to think it's okay to make new hydropower dams. How do you think, like you said, the youth is playing a large role in this, reshaping this? Do you think I mean, there are probably a lot of young people working there with you. How is their outlook on this in terms of reshaping needs for electricity and so forth?
I don't really know. We haven't discussed it. I haven't discussed it with them so much, and I'm not really familiar with their stance, or I cannot really tell. But if I may come back to this green energy thing, that is of course true. We can utilize these rivers as green energy. However, we must understand these rivers have their cycles. They can be important habitats for fish, for instance, and we have floods in these rivers that fertilize a lot of land, for instance, and so the rivers themselves are playing an important role for so many species of animals and plants and everything. So it's not just about power, but it's also about ecology, really. The power might be green, but it might come with some how do you say minuses, consequences for plants and other species.
Right. But I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate here. But we have these big energy companies, and they often talk about the greening of their business, and they especially talk about these fish-friendly turbines who are supposed to let the fish go up and down the river. Is this a real concept? I mean, I feel there's a lot of skepticism about this thing within ecologists. I mean, it must affect the rivers upstream if they're being built dams and turbines being inserted. Isn't it so?
I would think so. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And then also what I mentioned, the floods when the rivers flood over like vegetated lands, bringing a lot of silt and fertilizing the land, making it more viable option for like I said, plants and maybe small animals, species, insects, etc. And so it's it's complicated.
Yeah, ecology is a fascinating phenomena.
Absolutely.
I want to take us back to the tourism that you mentioned. There's great economic gain being had from the tourism here in Iceland, but there's also some dangers. I mean, there's effect of tourism, for example, due to off-track driving, increased and changed development. How has this management of sustainable tourism been in your work in the Vatnajökulsþjóðgarður National Park compared to maybe other parts of the Highlands, which don't have the same infrastructure, if we can talk about the national park being an infrastructure in itself?
I think this is a really good question, because I think the fact that especially with the Highlands, we have areas within Vatnajökull National Park which are very vulnerable to off-road driving, and very tempting to do some off-road driving in these sands. But Vatnajökull National Park, I believe, has tackled this pretty seriously with rangers, putting out rangers out in the field who educate and inform visitors, and I'm not sure we have any data which proves our point, but I think it's safe to assume that this is doing a lot in terms of preventing these negative effects of tourism. And just like this is something negative, but still we cannot really put these areas off limits to people, because there will be not little gained in terms of I think we are trying to use these areas to educate people about the importance of nature and the importance of nature conservation, and it's difficult to do that if you're then closing the areas off for people.
Is that education mainly for the rangers working in the national park, or is it for tourists and interested people as well?
Yeah, for the tourists, of course, the rangers receive their education from the environmental agencies, but it's then up to them to forward their knowledge to the tourists, bring on the message, and etc. So.
Right. We have been hearing in the media a lot about potential development of hotels in the Highlands. I mean, with the Central Highland National Park, would there be a criteria, as you talked about these criteria 6 and 1A and so forth before, would there be a criteria within the Central National Highland Park that would allow for hotel buildings, for example?
Not a criteria specifically. I think like hotels won't be excluded just by making it a national park. Really, we have the national planning which has to be followed also. Landskipulag, if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
Which puts sort of like limits on what type of buildings can be, accommodation buildings can be built in the Highlands. For some reason, it does allow for hotels, but it also states that these hotels may not diminish the wilderness experience for people, and how that is supposed to.
How does that happen?
Yeah, exactly. I got the feeling. I think this hotel term came in late in the work with the national planning, and it was probably to satisfy some voices who wanted something different. But I think the wilderness term sort of like excludes it, nullifies it. So I don't know. But yeah, I think my honest belief is that the management plan would exclude it, but I cannot really tell. And we have some examples of proposals for, well, they always stop calling it hotels, but very large accommodations being proposed in highland areas, very close to wilderness areas or areas of protection. And yeah, I'm putting my hopes on that people will come to their senses when they start making the management plans for these areas. Because when you think about it, like a hotel in the Highlands, just from like the sustainability aspect, you have a remote place with no or very little infrastructure. It is very difficult to reach for 10 or 9 months per year. So you have a really short season, and for the winter season, it's a very difficult place to reach, and the carbon footprint of each visitor is very high. You do not have any staff members working or living in the neighborhood, no pool of possible staff members, so you have to bring everybody from far away. So it's a very expensive business with a very short operating season. So it's not a really viable business, and I think it speaks volumes that everyone who is proposing these hotels or wants to build a hotel in the Highlands, it's never anybody with experience of running a hotel. You don't see Hilton or Marriott or Foss Hotel or Icelandic hotels or anyone proposing to build a hotel in the Highlands, because I think people with real business sense, they understand it's a bad business. So yeah, and it's a bad business, and with neighborhood.
Also, it's becoming kind of humorous how these hotel buildings are being built so fast and so many, and one can only imagine what will happen if tourism will decrease, which it probably will at some point. And it would be sad to have the Highlands completely filled with hotel buildings at that point when we want the wilderness.
Yeah, and I think we are seeing a little setback in the tourism right now. At least there isn't this exponential growth like it has been. So I think people are now a little bit doing a little rethinking, and I think they are already hurting, some of them who are operating in the Highlands, because they are among the first places that start to suffer.
Yeah. Coming back to young people who are interested in for example, working in national parks. What is the process of becoming a person like you who works in a national park as a ranger?
I don't really think it's a process, really. At least not in my case, and it's sort of like just one thing led to another, or one step led to another step, and sort of like. But my background is I have a bachelor degree in tourism, and at the same time I obtained that degree, I did a ranger course with the environmental agency. And actually, first I joined up with a colleague of mine as a hut warden in the Highlands, which eventually led to me applying because I had gotten to know that place really well. So I applied for a job with the environmental agency, a seasonal ranger job, and got it. And then there was like an opening within the national park. Where I was lucky enough to get a position. So it's really about getting your foot inside, getting over the threshold, and then just work with enthusiasm and continue to seek knowledge and learn. But I don't. Unfortunately, there are maybe not enough full-time jobs around for it to be a certain way to go in. It's so small scale yet that. But definitely to like increase your chances, I think it's good to start working, doing some of those seasonal jobs. Maybe just as a general staff member or as a ranger, just to go in and learn how it works and show if you are up for the task. That's definitely going to increase your chances when a job opening comes up.
Right.
Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are interested in these circles. How do you think the Global Arctic Youth Network, which is hosting this webinar, could benefit national parks around the Arctic, like the Central Highland National Park, for example, regarding education, community outreach, development of best practices of national park operations in general? I mean, how do you see their role, like young people? How can they help with this process that is going on?
Well, that's a big question, really. But I think like politicians, for instance, they always, at least when elections are ahead, they tend to listen to voters, and so I think they can help just by being active, if I may say, whether I should say politically active or whatever. But also just be, I don't know, if they use, for instance, the national parks and are seen in the parks and make their voices heard within the parks. I think that may help for the voice to get some authority or whatever. Yeah, but I'm not really sure how to answer your question.
Yeah, this is maybe a this is maybe a question that could also be answered by Hillary, because these are what 60 people in 19 countries that are committed to the Arctic. Hillary, if you could maybe shed some light on this, what do you think they could do to help with this development here in Iceland? And I mean, that could be extrapolated onto other areas around the Arctic, of course.
Well, basically what I know is that in the US, we have a policy called the National Environmental Policy Act, which basically asks for anybody to comment on any action that a federal government is taking. And honestly, we, as the federal agency, we really do appreciate if a lot of the younger people can come, if they know what they're talking about, to comment on it, because we don't know. A lot of the people who are in the park, they know a very small aspect of it. They don't see the larger picture, or they don't see your aspect of it. So, I mean, any comment, if you can say anything about the projects that we may be proposing, tell us. Honestly, it's more heads are better than one. So, I mean, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does in a way. This is just, I mean, this is also just a question that I wanted to throw to you, because I mean, you are not from Iceland, and you are moderating this series, and this is an important topic for us Icelandic people. And I mean, Peter, you could also maybe tell us about there seems to be a political acceptance between most parties around the benefits of nature in general and national parks. Peter, could you expand a little bit on this, maybe from the perspective of your work at Landvernd and the Youth Environmentalist Association?
Yeah, so in Iceland in the last years, we have definitely seen a big transition towards sustainability, at least in the dialogue in the politics. For example, regarding the founding of the national park in the Central Highlands, currently there is a committee with members of parliament from all the at least largest parties. So there is actually political commitment and participation to the project now from the whole spectrum in the political society in Iceland. So, and I think that also, of course, this is not only related to the value of the Highlands, but we have, of course, those challenges like climate change, ocean acidification, microplastics going everywhere in the ocean. So I think that we are experiencing a really positive shift towards sustainability and, for example, the founding of a Central Highlands National Park, which would of course be a very important aspect of our move towards sustainability.
Yeah, but could you expand a little further on that? Because some people might say, well, making the Central Highlands a national park also takes away the option of making green electricity. Sorry for coming back to this, but this seems to be a prevalent question that the Icelandic nation has. So how does it contribute to sustainable development, the national park, Peter?
Yeah, so that's actually a very good question, especially because the situation in Iceland is quite different than in most regions in the Arctic, because in many places the struggle is the shift towards green energy, because oil and gas is being used a lot. But in Iceland we have this, I don't know if it's unique, but quite peculiar circumstances that we have so much green energy that it has become a lot more than we, at least the population, actually needs. So for example, only 5% of the entire electricity production goes to homes. And if you take all businesses except for, I think, 6 companies, they only use 20% of the energy. So regarding power development and production, we are kind of basically on the opposite sides of the coin compared to those areas who are really in need of shifting to green energy. We were basically from the start had green energy, if you look at the last decades. So we are really having the different challenge of making sure we don't do too much. And when we're talking about the Central Highlands and the possible energy development there we also have to look at the, like we have been talking about, the unique wilderness, because when you have destroyed some natural features that only exist in this one place in the world, and especially if you're looking at, well, either if you're looking at one specific waterfall in Iceland or the Central Highlands as a whole, then we are really losing something that we will never get back if we don't protect it.
Right. I just, this word, the unique wilderness, this seems to be maybe in our circles it seems to mean a lot more than to maybe politicians and economists maybe in particular. How do you see, I mean, how can we start implementing and understanding this concept better? And what is the, I mean, is it a concrete concept enough at this point? Do you think so, or does it need to be understood further, the unique wilderness concept?
So of course, we always need to have an increased dialogue. And for example, the definition of wilderness, especially regarding the different, like the 1A or 1B or 2 classes in the IUCN system, has all, of course, had a lot of kind of conflict here in Iceland. And that, of course, has mostly been related to land use, whether it is energy production or hunting or tourism or grazing. So an increased dialogue is really important. And the good thing is that there is a big increase also with politicians of recognizing this importance. And I think we really need to foster that discussion to be able to really deepen the discourse. And yeah.
Right. But we talk a lot about politicians and how they need to deepen the discussion. You are now working on this Arctic Youth Network with Hillary. What do you see the role of young people, as we were talking about before, in this discussion on the establishment of the Central Highland National Park?
Yeah, so in this context, I think one of the main contributions of the youth is to recognize the value in our highlands. Because like you mentioned earlier, there has been a pretty big trend in Iceland to look at a waterfall or some spectacular unique phenomenon in nature, but only look at it as something you can use for yourself. Like a waterfall is only good if it's making you money. And we've had in our culture in Iceland this disconnect for the last decades, basically since our kind of late industrialization after the Second World War. And I think the youth is essential of going back to the nature, basically. Well, of this view of it being essential of our lives, because when we only look at nature as something that we can utilize for our energy and not something essential to our mental health being, even, then we really need to stop and think. So I think the youth, and that's maybe one of the benefits of having a global Arctic Youth Network, where we can really have this discussion and then have insights from different regions of the Arctic and different regions of the globe, then we can really deepen this discourse and recognize the unique aspects of each region.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind, I'm gonna interject my own viewpoint into this. This
Please
is Hillary from the Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna with the Fish and Wildlife Service. That's a major aspect as to why I want to be a part of this youth network. The way I see it, the world needs to move more towards conserving wildlife and wilderness and just the wild places of the world to give people that opportunity to experience it. And honestly, you don't make change by trying to influence people who have made up their minds and are going to move in a certain direction. You make change by asking the youth of the world to try to see from your viewpoint, and to hopefully maybe they'll come along with that, and then they'll move forward with that from now until they become an older person and they can make their own policies. And with that, I believe now it is time to open it up for some questions. So you guys are more than welcome to type in something onto the chat screen. I have access to that screen, and you're also welcome to unmute your phones and ask us some questions. All right, nobody's saying anything so far. So I'm gonna go back to Guðmundur. You were talking about how it is generally a bad business decision to put hotels in the middle of a national park. And I very much agree with you on that. However, there is a hotel in Grand Canyon National Park, and they seem to be doing fairly okay.
Yeah, sorry. You misunderstood me. I was referring to it is a bad business in the Highlands of Iceland because of how inaccessible they are for large parts of the year. Yeah. So not a national park per se, but just the Highlands. Having it in the Highlands, I don't think it's a viable business option.
Not a good plan. Okay. Also, you were talking about how long it took you to become a federal employee. That's been my experience as well. When I first started out as a federal employee, I actually had to volunteer for 2 years. And then I had to work my way up. And finally, I got that permanent position. Would you mind telling us a bit more about your early on experiences?
Yeah, well, actually, it didn't take me that long, really. It was step by step, but first, I never had my mindset on doing this. What I'm doing today. It was sort of like one coincidence that led to another. So, like I said, I started as a warden. And being a warden in a hut in the Highlands sort of like increased my how do you say, respect for the area. So I wanted to do more, and it got me more interested in conservation and preservation. So my next step was to go to apply for the ranger thing, which I was lucky enough to get. And after that, I got the permanent position. However, I would say in general that it is perhaps relatively easy to get a position like this in Iceland, even though the positions are few. Through my work, I've met a lot of volunteers, both from Europe and the United States, who are really have their mindset on doing something for nature. And they are volunteering year after year. They are trying to get a break with the federal agencies, etc. Some of them do, some not. So yeah, so really respect the work that and the effort that many people are putting in to get into these jobs, which usually do not pay extremely well or anything, but people are doing it just to, yeah,
Fantastic.
Yeah, enthusiastic, absolutely.
All right, so Tasha Elizarde, sorry if I mutilated your last name there. She asked a question. She said, I'd like to return to the subject of how we see youth's role in changing how we view our parks and nature in general. What does everyone else think on this call? How do you view national parks in your life? I'm going to take the first stab at that one. I actually started out my career as a volunteer in a national park, so I very much appreciate all national parks, and I feel like they are very important for the development of everybody, not just people who enjoy the outdoors, but I think they're a very good stepping stone to being outside and just enjoying life a little bit more. What does everybody else think?
Yeah, Guðmundur here, and I totally agree with you. I think the parks, probably, if they are properly managed, they give young people the chance to experience and enjoy nature, and especially with if they have like good junior ranger programs, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe this is Peter here. I'd like to add one point. For me, it creates this trust that when I enter some nature area that is part of a national park, I can know that it is being actively protected by rangers and overseen, which is, of course, since in Iceland we have all these regions that are not part of a national park. And after I had been working as a ranger in the Highlands in 2015 and 16, there was a region not far away that had basically the same natural value as the region I was managing, but no national park, no ranger, no anything. So you could really see the scars in the landscape after off-road driving, and no one. So it's really important to really know that someone is taking care of the area.
Fantastic. And Rafn, do you have anything that you wish to add to this? Kind of our closing comment.
Yeah, right. Maybe this is I want to be mindful of your time, especially Guðmundur. Thank you for coming. But there's maybe one thing that I would like to ask you. That is a question that probably a lot of people are worried about, because in Iceland we have so many different municipalities, and I mean I mean how many municipalities are connected to this proposed Central Highland National Park? Do you think that this is going to be a hurdle in the introduction of the park itself, having so many people who have something at stake in terms of establishing the national park?
Yes and no. Not if we can convey our experience from Vatnajökull National Park. I think like the municipalities have had a lot of power in Vatnajökull National Park, and their voices have been heard. I think the message from the municipalities involved are that other municipalities really don't have to be afraid of anything. They will have the control, the majority control, really. So yeah, it might be a little bit of an obstacle, but with when the discussion, with proper discussion, it should be okay, I think.
Okay, well, Hillary, maybe you want to take it from here. We have hit the 1 hour mark, and you want to make any final remarks?
I believe that this has been a fantastic presentation of the Global Arctic Youth Network. This was our first presentation, so thank you, Peter, thank you, Rafn, thank you, Guðmundur. And yeah, I hope to hear all of you guys are going to the Arctic Youth Summit in October of this year in Rovaniemi, Finland, and I hope you all have a fantastic day. And enjoy the rest of your life. Talk to you next week, okay?
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.